Think about this. You get so mad when people waste your money. Why don't you get the same level of mad when people waste your time? You're
So
never going
true.
to get it back, right? I mean, like, talk about a non-renewable resource. So when people think of it that way, they start to get more impassioned about taking it back. Complexity is on defense. Simplicity is offense. So when you act with complexity, you are reacting to change. You are agile, you are resilient to everyone else's change. I don't want my team just reacting to change. I want them driving it. So I need them to be simplified so they can drive the change, meaning they have time to think, they have time to do meaningful work. There's a big difference between being in a groove and being in a rut. And the problem is they look and feel the same. And just because you know the process doesn't mean the process isn't crap. And so we've got to be able to take the time to understand that what is meaningful work.
This is how we learn now.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, So Energy, Forsaven, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.
Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. It's a pleasure.
It's incredible to have you on L&D Disrupts, and I'm fascinated by your work. And there aren't many people who've spent so much time helping so many different organizations really cut through complexity. Right. And I just love the fact that so much of your work is about simplifying complex things. And before we get into how do you do that, why don't you tell us a bit about what do you do at Future Think that kind of requires you to simplify complex things?
Let me start by saying I didn't have a vision that I was going to own the space on simplification. Life has a funny way of driving you to things. And when I started my company, Future Think, here in New York 20 years ago, it was about innovation. It was about helping people innovate. And the story goes, we kept bringing in our facilitators to companies that wanted us to help them better innovate. And what was so surprising to us was the resistance we then got when we went to those companies, because they wanted to innovate. But then they realized, oh my God, we don't have time to do this. And the problem with innovation and all these things is addition, more. And so the front end of innovation isn't getting ideas. People have them. The front end of innovation is giving them the time and space to actually think. So we've got to subtract before we add. And that's where simplification came in. People are overwhelmed. They don't want more. Yes, they'd love to innovate, but really they're like, when? How is this going to happen? And so that's how I got to simplification, was purely by accident and discovery, that it does more than just make people more productive. People are productive, right? It gives them the space to do more important work. That's really what it is. I help them get rid of the crap so they can do more important things.
Cut the crap. That's what you help people do. I love it.
We do. We actually help them form cut the crap committees. I mean, you laugh, but like these time suck sessions, because it just as much as it is like an activity, it's like business therapy, which sounds funny, but it's true. Like, people are like, if you ask them what their time sucks are, you've got to allot at least half of the time for people to just tell you their story about how they've been wronged with their time. And then a catharsis happens, because you actually show them that there's value in getting rid of things just as much as there is as adding things. And we don't think that way. We only think adding is value. And actually, we're at a new moment where subtracting is value too. And that's important.
Do you see any kind of patterns in what the most common time sucks are in
Oh
kind
my
of all the
God.
conversations you have?
Here's the redeeming thing. I do, and it's the work of work. It's things like meetings and emails and reports and decision making. And every time I'm up with a company, whether it's regulated, unregulated, big, small, the message to them is, congratulations, you're like everyone else. Because you're human, not because I'm not minimizing the problem. In fact, I'm normalizing it. And there's a difference, right? Because everybody spends the majority of their day in meetings and emails. Most of them suck, and they weren't hired for meetings and emails. So how can we get rid of the things? We've got to get rid of the stuff that doesn't matter so they can do what they were hired to do in the first place, for the company and for themselves, right? Who wants to die thinking that they spent most of their days in meetings and emails? No one. So there's a real like passion for it because people think about this. You get so mad when people waste your money. Why don't you get the same level of mad when people waste your time? You're
So
never going to
true.
get it back, right? Talk about a non-renewable resource. So when people think of it that way, they start to get more impassioned about taking it back. And that's really what we want to help them do. Take back their time.
And do you find most people or organizations have the awareness that these things are time suck?
Yes, but they don't think that they have any control over it.
That's interesting.
People, they don't. Here's the thing, like when I ask you at the end of the day, what do you spend your day doing? What do you say? What do you spend your day doing? If I said, what did you spend your day doing? What kind of visuals pop into your head?
Yeah,
Anything
yeah,
come to
it's
mind?
meetings, isn't it? I'd imagine most people would say I jump from one Zoom to another or from one meeting to another and then triage my inbox and send a bunch of
And then I
emails.
triage. Yeah, but
Yeah,
look at the language you use. It's like
yeah,
emergency, chaos,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Lack of control. So what I say to people is we're not leading, we're not even managing. All we are do is executing. All we do all day is execute our calendar. Because when I ask someone, what did you do today? Really what pops into their head is their Outlook calendar. And they're like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. That's what they're logistically telling me what they did, not meaningfully telling me what they did. Because we are literally living by our calendar. And people, they're not spending their time with intent. Their time is being hijacked. And so we've got to help them be able to stop having their time being hijacked and feel more control and permission to take control of it. There's a difference, right? Because we say, use your time with intent, but then people aren't allowed to say no. So it's easy to say. You got to give them the tools to be able to do it without fear. And
And
that's what's
this
important.
this is quite a big thing, right? Like I've actually this has been a bit of a running theme in a few of the episodes that I've done lately, which is around
Really?
just ability to say no, right? Like
Right. It's a
and
huge thing.
a huge
Huge.
thing, and professionally and personally, right? People find it hard to say no. Why is that?
A couple things. Fear and obligation. Fear because they don't want to say no or not do something that could be career limiting, that could be wrong, that could get them fired. Really, it comes down to no one wants to get fired. And then it's obligation. Like in your personal life, sometimes it's different, right? Like you do things because you're like, oh, I don't want to be mean. I should be nice. So, they did something for me. So we are boundaryless with our time. And if we can start defining, I say what we'll say yes to and what we'll say no to, then we can use our time with more intention, right? So it's most people, when you say, what will you say yes to? I don't even think they've thought about it. They just, well, I say yes if my time's available. It's more about is the time free versus what I'm using the time for. And what they'll say no to, they can tell you a bunch of things they'd love to say no to, but they're not sure they're allowed. So let me give you an example at Pfizer, and we worked with them on training their simplicity champions. Albert, who's the CEO now, before he was CEO, he was in charge of innovation and simplicity. And he told his teams to say no to meetings. And right, what a good guy. And a month later, because they look at Outlook data, and most people do, their Microsoft data, everyone was still going to meetings, and he was kind of pissed off, right? Like I gave you permission. And
Yeah.
his chief of staff told him, he said, yeah, but you still say yes to all the meetings.
Wow. Okay.
So what drives it is fear. And so he gave permission, but he didn't get rid of the fear. So they go hand in hand. My job is to get rid of the friction, but it's also to help them get rid of the fear. And that's where leadership has to step up, basically, and
So I
model
guess
the behavior.
to connect the dots to where we started talking about this, which is you're
Mm.
trying to drive innovation. And actually, what we're saying is all of these time sucks and crap, for a lack of a better word,
Take you away from
is
it.
holding you back from innovating. So
That's correct.
just help me connect those dots. How is it that me sitting in meetings and me saying yes to all of these things, how is that stopping us from innovating as an organization?
It's a couple things. One, you're spending your time not on meaningful work, but meaningless work. We're going through the motions. That's why I say to people, like there's a big difference between being in a groove and being in a rut. And the problem is they look and feel the same. And just because you know the process doesn't mean the process isn't crap. And so we've got to be able to take the time to understand that what is meaningful work. So that's part of the problem. We spend our time on things that don't matter. The second thing is, even when people do have the time, they've forgotten how to think. And I'll get in front of audiences and I'll say, how many of you wish you had more time to think? Every double hands go up, feet go up. Everyone's like, yeah, I want more time to think. Why is thinking such a daring act? Why don't we actually put time on the calendar to think? Because that's where ideas come from. I'm in meetings and I'm in email. Are you paid for meetings and emails? No. Should you be spending your time there? No. How do we get more time to think? And so that's really where the dots connect is getting rid of the meaningless, making the space for thinking to happen. And then that's where the meaningful work can come. And that makes it, you got to put priorities then on getting rid of things and thinking time.
I love the, are you in a groove or are you in a rut? Tell me, how do I know which one I'm in?
It's a good point. To me, it's when you're in a groove that like you could do it for hours, right? And at the end of it, you've made progress and you're satisfied. You might be tired, but you're energized. When you're in a rut, you are not energized and you don't feel like you've made progress. So, yeah, I got through that stack of reports, but no one's going to read them. I'm going to have to do it again. I checked the box. So, it's almost like it's an accomplishment and a feeling that are different. I think that's where it takes time to think, is you really have to think, yeah, I know the process, but is it the right process? Yeah, it's organized, but is it simplified? It's different.
I do feel like this is business therapy for me, Lisa, because what you said around the kind of time to think, I can 100% relate to, right? And I sit there going, and when moments where I have been in control and taken that time to think, I can align it to some of the big moments in our business as a journey, right? As a CEO, I can see that aligns to some of the great moments in the business. Yet it's so hard to be able to say, I need to prioritize this time to think over being a part of this conversation, unblocking that. So the rest of this is
100%.
going to be tactics everyone can use, but really this is therapy for me. So let's kick this off. Where do I start, Lisa?
I think what you have to do is define meaningful work. So, it's really easy to get rid of things, but it's even easier to get sucked back into the complexity. Like I like to say, complexity is like a weed, it grows back. So we have to have a compass, not just the clock. So the compass is what is meaningful work. And I ask people to define that. And they all say, oh, we value meaningful work here. And I'll say, well, then what is it? And they give me like 17 different sentences. And I'll go, so how does your team know what meaningful work is if you can't define it? So I think meaningful work is something you can do as a team to say, what will we spend time on and what won't we? It's almost easier to define what you won't spend time on, by the way.
And
And
how do
then
you get to that point, Lisa? What are some of the questions you're going to be asking yourself to arrive at that definition of what
I
meaningful
actually,
work is?
well, that's an excellent question. There's an exercise you can do, and you can do it by yourself or you can do it with your team. I say do it with yourself first if you're a leader. Make a T chart, and on the left-hand side, you're going to have typical tasks. And on the right-hand side is what you wish you were doing. So the first step is to write down 20 typical tasks that you do in a week, in a month, and you can be anal about it and use a time tracker. You just look at your calendar, but be specific. And if it feels hard, you're doing it right. And what happens once you list those 20 things is then you say, circle the things that are truly meaningful work. And what people find is they don't circle many things, because it's meetings and emails and reports and whatever. They're obligations, they're things that get you to the meaningful things. The question then you ask is, if it's not circled, meaning it's not meaningful, why are you doing it? And if you're going to make excuses, I have to, I need to, facilitate, your goal is to get rid of some of the things on the left-hand side, because then you can, that only then will you make space. Otherwise, you're making excuses for the right-hand side, which is what do you wish you were doing? And that's where the interesting thing comes in if you as a leader facilitate this with your team, because what you wish you were doing is the meaningful work. So what happens is when you look at this list, people write down things like meeting with clients, coming up with innovative ideas, driving strategy, upskilling my team. They tend to be more external and strategic things. The
Right.
left-hand side that you started with is internal and meaningless things. Their time sucks. So
And
you're you're defining meaningful work in the process together, which is helpful.
do you find sometimes people stick with some of those typical day-to-day tasks because it's almost like a bad habit or addiction that you can't kind of weed yourself off? Like
It's a
you
bomb.
condition to, yeah,
Yes, that's a short answer. Yeah. And by the way, I do it because I'm human, right? There's comfort in, and believe me, I've got my like remarkable tablet here, and I'm gonna make a to-do list, and I'm gonna cross it off because it feels so good. And look at all that I did. Look at all that I did. Because we've been trained that volume is better than value. And I'm rewarded based on how much I get done.
right.
And or people use that as an excuse. I'm so busy. And so there's a dopamine hit that comes with that. But the problem is then when people miss their goals, it's an excuse. Look at all I did, but I didn't do the right things. So we've
Yeah,
got to wean people away from volume and get to value. That's why the left-hand side is the volume, the right-hand side is the value. That's the T-chart exercise.
it makes sense where you're trying to prove effort because you can't really prove impact you've had on the organization. Yeah, we see this, I get to speak to a lot of L&D professionals day to day, and often that's the challenge they're caught in. They're prioritizing output over outcome, and there's a bunch of activity that's not really moving the needle for them. So it's frustrating.
100%. Yeah.
It's frustrating for them because you've done all of this great work and built this quote unquote perfect learning program, but actually in the employee engagement survey, everyone's still saying they don't feel supported and they don't feel like they're growing, and your exit interviews are still bashing L&D, and you're sitting there going, I spent so much time and money creating so many courses and so many programs. And so it's really that audit of, are you really spending your time in the right places? And so let's say,
Right.
I mean, that in itself sounds like a very difficult exercise to do, because I guess the blocker for this might be the lack of self-awareness, right? Doing it as an individual. How do you help someone who's lacking on the self-awareness side of things?
It, there's some obvious things you can say to them. This is me as a very direct individual. I can't, people have to help themselves. At some point, you can't force them. So that's why working with leaders is often harder than working with individuals because you have to reveal to them. You can't tell them they're the problem. Just like with me, you can't, you got to reveal it to me. Don't tell me I'm the problem. I might not like that so much. And I often am the problem, by the way. But the interesting thing when you do the left-hand side of that chart, just to use that exercise, is you write down all the things that they were doing and saying, is this where you get your energy from? Is this really moving the needle forward? And you're trying to anchor on their value. Not that they're doing it wrong. They have the best of intentions, but their time gets hijacked. And we're trying to show them that your time is too important to not use with intention. And when you frame it like that, then they're like, you're right. I do deserve, this is not the right time. I need to elevate myself. And they start to get more honest about where they want to spend their time versus feeling accused that they're not spending their time in the right places. That's the key as a coach.
And once, say we've done this exercise and we've arrived at an understanding and awareness that, okay, this is the meaningful work, but right now most of my time is taken up by all of this stuff over on this side.
All this other stuff, yeah.
All this other stuff. What do I do from there?
Now that's interesting. I was working with Safas, who's the CEO of Novartis. We were talking about this and that busy is something people love to be, but busy becomes an excuse. So we were saying what happens when people become unbusy is they become uncomfortable. And that's interesting because suddenly we've gotten rid of the stuff on the left-hand side. We are actually have time for meaningful work. And they don't know how to get started because they've forgotten how to think. Literally, that's why building in deep work time, thinking time, we've got to make that something that's valued and something that we get used to doing. It's like when people are afraid to be alone with their thoughts, like they almost don't know how to get started again. And so that's what we're saying, which is you're going to be unbusy and it's going to be uncomfortable because you're not going to feel productive. And as long as people know that there's a transition period and this is how I'm supposed to feel, then they feel better about it. Otherwise, they feel like they're doing something wrong. But that will happen to you. You will feel uncomfortable.
Any tactics for dealing with that uncomfort, or is that just about that discomfort is part of the process, right?
I think it's part of the process.
Yeah.
I think it's part of the process. And I think it's also starting small with thinking, which is, it's not like we're saying, stop doing and just only think, because then you're going to feel like I didn't go from being like an executive to a philosopher. You want to, there's a middle ground here, but set a task, set a strategic task that I'm going to think about this for an hour today. Start small. And then that people start to get comfortable with it and see the value of it. I'll tell you this one story if I can.
Cool.
I was working with the head of risk at S&P at Standard & Poor's and the head of risk, right? And so he was drowning in minutia all day long. And his team said they wanted to make decisions. Everyone says, I wish I was more empowered. And so he told them, I'd love you to be empowered because I feel like all I do is make meaningless decisions for everybody because they don't want to make them. They're risk averse because what people say they want and what they really want are typically two
Yeah,
different
yeah,
things of fear, right? He told his team, he said, listen, you won't tell me you want to make decisions, but you keep emailing me saying, can I invite this person to a meeting? Yes, just make the decision. So he said, look, here's what we're going to do at our monthly status meeting. Next month, when we meet, each of you, he had 10 people on his team, I want you to tell me 2 decisions you made without me. And of course, their first reaction was, what kind of decisions? Do I have to tell you about the decision? He's just make the decision. See the uncomfort?
yeah.
And he had to have him sit with it. And so that month, when they reported back, 10 people, 2 decisions, there was 20 less decisions he had to make. And they talked about, oh, it was uncomfortable. They started super small. Then he said 3 decisions, 4 decisions. And I said, how did you know it was working? And he said, by the end of the year, I was so uncomfortable with how much time I had on my hands. And I said, that's interesting. And he said,
Yeah.
I finally got what I wanted. And I had to be careful what I wished for because now I finally had time to think. And what it made him realize as a leader is what simplicity does is it gets rid of excuses and there's nowhere to hide. So now you've been given all this time for strategy. Where is it? And so he said, it took me a good month to get back in the groove again, but it's valuable, right? It's what you want. And you just have to get through the discomfort and start taking the time to do it.
Are
That's my
there any
advice.
forcing functions, Lisa? Should I be like blocking out days or afternoons in my calendar every week? What are
Yeah.
things I can do to make this easier as a habit?
Yeah, I like that you're saying that. And thank you. So being tactical is I tell people to block time for deep work. And there's something I tell my team, which is everyone on my team has to carve out a half day for deep work. I don't care what half day it is. I do it in the morning because I love to get all jacked up on caffeine when it's quiet. That's what I do. That's my best deep work time. And some people do it on Friday afternoons, some people do it Wednesday morning. I don't really care. But what I'm doing is I'm giving them a signal that thinking time is not just important, it's mandatory because I'm taking away the fear. It's not their fault. My boss told me I had to think. Now, if they don't use it, that's on them. They can fill it with their to-do list, whatever they want. But I'm saying, I want you to have time for strategic thinking because the stats show that people only spend 14% of their time on meaningful work. That's 5 hours a week. I will
Wow.
go out of business if my team only spends 5 hours a week on strat. I will. And so when you start to get them thinking about that and carving out the time, there's a sense of permission, but eventually it shifts to a sense of accountability. And that's important from a leadership perspective.
How do you deal with, sometimes when you're talking about, especially from an L&D perspective, of being
Mm.
more strategic rather than reactive order takers, the challenge they have is, although I might be aware and I know we need to change the way we do things in L&D, it's how do you bring the rest of the organization, how do you bring about that change where they're used to perceiving me as a kind of
Mm.
reactionary order taker, and now I'm saying I need to be a part of the kind of strategic thinking around this. How do I go about doing that?
Well, everyone has different levels of strategic thinking. That's the other thing, which is, look, as a CEO of a company, I don't need everybody chiming in on the strategic direction of the company all the time. Not everybody gets to set strategy, but I want their input within their roles. That's fine. So I just want to make that clear too. You don't have 80,000 people driving strategy, but they can have a voice. Okay. A couple things you made me think about is this. One, the thing about simplification is it does this. It gets you out of reactive mode and gets you into proactive mode. Complexity is on defense. Simplicity is offense. So when you act with complexity, you are reacting to change. You are agile, you are resilient to everyone else's change. I don't want my team just reacting to change. I want them driving it. So I need them to be simplified so they can drive the change, meaning they have time to think, they have time to do meaningful work. So simplification and thinking time is very important in that sense. The other piece that's really, how do I want to say this? That's interesting is getting people on board with simplification and having time for meaningful work is so easy, you won't believe it. I can't think of a single person or a single company that I've gone into where they're like, no, we're fine. We like the complexity. We're fine. No one says that. And so it's very easy to get people on board to carve out time. You just have to ask them. They've never been asked. Like I do kill a stupid rule sessions with my team every quarter. It is gold. I just got off the phone with a huge technology company today in Ireland, and they're like, we saw your keynote. We're running next week. We're doing a 90-minute Kill a Stupid Rule session. Give me your watch outs. And I was like, this is gold. I said, my watch out is be prepared. You're going to be overrun with suggestions. People have lots of ideas. You just have to make it safe for them to tell you them. And you must get rid of some things. If you ask people what their ideas are to simplify and then you don't do anything with them, you're a jerk. You're a jerk. So that's kind of long-winded, but the
Yeah,
thing is that people will do it. And killing stupid rules is the best way to get them started because it signals you're serious.
so what does that session look like, Lisa? If I wanted to run a Kill a Stupid Rule, what does that look like?
Oh, it's glorious. It is literally, it's people, the response from people is like holding up their phones at a concert. They're so excited to be able to do this, you know? It's easy. You say to your team, look, we're going to do a Kill a Stupid Rule session, and I want us to identify all the wasted time, the time sucks, the things that take you away from valuable work, the stuff that's redundant, whatever it is. If you could get rid of any two rules that hold you back from your KPIs or doing meaningful work, what would they be? There's only two rules to the exercise. There are red rules and green rules. And what that means is a red rule is something that's government regulated. It would be illegal for you to get rid of it. You would go to jail. Okay. Don't touch those rules. Okay. This is an integrity driven exercise. Everything else is fine. The other thing is you got to stay in your sphere of control because what you don't want it to be is a complaint session. You know, I'm going to throw HR under the bus, legal under the bus. Oh, those IT guys, you're going to throw them under the bus, the usual suspects. Talk about the work you do every day, the stuff you have control over getting rid of. You will have, God, we did it with Pfizer. I had 800 leaders in a room. We gave them 15 minutes. We had thousands of suggestions, thousands. None of a handful were rules. That's the surprise. They won't be rules. They'll be time sucks, annoyances, report, things you have perfect control over, but you just never thought to ask. So it's a beautiful, productive, time-saving, money-saving exercise that will really be like a business therapy session.
It's incredible because there's a stat that I talk about in one of my talks, which is around, I think it's the University of Hertfordshire or Huddersfield, but it's like 70% of people would choose to stick with what they're doing now, even if they knew the change was guaranteed to give them a better outcome, right? Even if they knew change was going to give them guaranteed success, they'd stick with what they've got. So much of it is really the fear associated with the risks that come with change. Right?
It's fear. Yeah.
How do you overcome that fear?
Yeah, that's the whole the devil you know thing. I remember, some of those studies you just referenced to. It's like people know that they shouldn't smoke and it's going to take years off their life, but oh, whatever. Or it's the performative stuff, right? I joined a gym. I don't go, but I joined a gym. So the first step, which is good. How do you get them over the fear? I say a couple of things. One, you define as a leader, you define this as a strategic initiative. It's not about productivity. It's about meaningful work. Because productivity sends the wrong message. It's saying you workers, you're not productive enough. And that's offensive to people, right? They don't have time. So defining that's one thing. The second thing is leaders have to model it. They have to model it. So it's the same thing when I mentioned Albert at Pfizer. You can tell people to say no, but if all you do is say yes, they will not do it because of fear. Model it, start small, and show that it's a strategic initiative for meaningful work. That's the key.
You touched on earlier that one of the biggest time sucks that I'm sure everyone listening to this is probably going, yeah, meetings, big time suck. And there have been a few organizations who've hit headlines in recent times around completely ruling out meetings above a certain size. Have you, in your time working with the organizations you do, seen like a good model for this where it's worked well?
Many. The thing about simplification is it usually starts off as a groundswell within certain business units or certain leaders. It's usually leader driven, right? And then it takes hold. Where it loses momentum is when it gets to the organization wide level and they over engineer it. For example, I know one pharmaceutical company and I'll tell you the good model, but I'll tell you one not to do, which is one pharmaceutical company said meetings are a problem. So I guess we should create the best practice for what a meeting is. And they created a 20-page manual that they sent out to people of what a good meeting. One, it's insulting to people that are running multi-billion-dollar drugs. Number two, being organized isn't being simplified, right? A 20-step process isn't a good process. So it's more about guardrails than handcuffs. Meetings is common, right? That's a thing. Netflix did something really great too. They said it really comes down to zombie meetings. There's all these meetings we have on our calendar that are recurring. That's where you start. And you say, let's look at all our recurring meetings and let's figure out which ones can we kill. And if we can't kill, let's change the frequency or put them on a time diet. That's an easy thing to do. And they found they got rid of 65% of their meetings. Shopify did the
Wow.
same thing, hundreds and thousands of hours. Meetings are an easy target because that's where we spend most of our time. And it's too easy to create meetings. That's the big problem. It's too easy. If there's one place where I would say you should create more friction, it's in our ability to create a meeting. I actually talked to Eric, who's the CEO of Zoom, and he's great. Every person in Zoom has to read my book. So he's a real like accolade of simplicity. But I said the brilliance of Zoom is that it is so easy to set up a meeting. And I said the terrible thing about Zoom is it is so easy to set up a meeting. And people do because they think it's collaboration, and most meetings suck. And most people don't know the question they're trying to answer. So they figure they'll take everyone else's time to figure that out. And I think if we had more time to think, we'd have less meetings.
I would agree because I think sometimes I see meetings happen and they're almost a symptom of a lack of process or a lack of thinking or lack of
Lack
structure.
of
Like,
thinking.
yeah, it's, even a lot of things that could probably be done asynchronous. You're not doing it asynchronous because you don't have, or you don't think you have the bandwidth to think about it and the structures and the process and the framework around it. And so you think the easy
Well,
thing to do, put in an invite.
yeah, just do an invite. One of the
Yeah,
things like Microsoft, that's interesting because I was giving a presentation and the guy at Microsoft was there and he raised his hand after there's an anecdote where at Microsoft, just to give you another good example, when they set up a meeting, you have to put the question that's going to be answered in the subject line of the meeting. And what
right.
that does was from an L&D perspective, curiosity and questions hijack the brain, right? The minute you hear a question, you activate solving it. So I'm thinking before the meeting. And he raised his hand. The guy from Microsoft said, I will tell you, this is one of the most singular, transformative things, small, that has happened within our company. And I said, that's saying a lot. So
Yeah.
that's one. I'll tell you one more. At NBC, we do a lot with the L&D group there in terms of like human skills. They said meetings are their biggest issue. And what they do is they have a culture of uninviting people. Now, this takes time because people say they don't want to be in meetings, but boy, do they have FOMO when they're not included. Human condition. I would. Like, why was not, am I not important enough? But the idea is that your time is more important. So what happens is they say to people, you know what? I'm going to uninvite you from this meeting because you've got so much other stuff to do. You're welcome to come. We'll read you in, or I just don't think it's worth your time. Now it's become a badge of honor to be uninvited from a meeting.
No.
So getting that vernacular in and understanding that it's not exclusion, it's actually your time is too valuable is a really big culture shift. And it's very productive. So I give NBCU credit for that.
Do you think it's harder now than ever to be a leader?
How much time do we have to talk about this? I, I think the thing I like to say is that leadership is lonely. I think it's very lonely. And I think that we've indexed too hard I think we better do a better job about what human-centered leadership is. And I think what people have interpreted that as, and I put this a lot on publications, academics, management consultants, of which I'm a part of that, right? I'm part of that complex, is we're making leaders try and be more than just leaders, meaning they're teachers, they're parents, they're life coaches, they're all this. It's a job. And we owe people good workplaces. We do. We owe them very good workplaces, that it's a pleasant place to work, that there's benefits, etc. But for that, people have to deliver. And by clarity isn't control. It's giving clarity. Feedback isn't toxic. It's for improvement. And I think that we've indexed on human-centered leadership thinking that it has to be nice and soft, and people are taking that as not having to be accountable. And that's why so many people come to, I think, heads of L&D now, and they're like, how do we have courses on accountability? How do we have, it's a huge surge right now on accountability because we've given so much on the benefit side, but we're not getting the return on it. So I don't know if you're feeling the same way, but I think that's one of the issues with leadership is, okay, I've given all these things. I'm not sure what else I can give. how do I make sure that there's a balance in terms of this relationship? And I think the pendulum is starting to swing back.
Yeah, and you can see the pendulum swinging, especially in the kind of tech company circuit. Or now
Mm.
it's been coined as founder mode, but I'm sure even prior to founder mode, there is this type of leadership style and approach that's always been there. But how do you see? Is it comes down to that expectation setting, right? What can you expect from me as a leader, as well as us as an organization?
It's expectations and intention. That's really what it is. And that's a lot of it, right? Like I feel, I'm almost 60, and so I'm an Xer. And I will tell you that my experience was always, I grew up in the generation where it used to be the bosses, it was command and control. That was it. You worked, you were loyal, you got to all that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not saying you go back, you go to that. But then the pendulum, as it always does, it swung to so different than that. Everyone has a say. What things are flexible, accountability is different, everything's about collaboration, and that's fine. But I think we've got to get back to a middle somewhere that encourages people to participate, but with accountability, that has people using their time and leaders with intention and clarity. And that's not a bad thing. I strongly feel that in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be a whole new way that we define what leadership is. Because right now, it's impossible. I think many leaders are burned out because they are expected to do too much and it's too hard to get the return that they need.
And do you think in some cases there's almost like a binary aesthetic to leadership? And we were just touching on kind of founder mode, and one of the things that have come out of that is that approach very much kind of micromanagement, and micromanagement is almost looked at in a binary way that is bad, right? The opposite of micromanagement is good. Do you think there are notions and concepts like this
I think it's too
where,
black and white. I think that's
yeah,
too black and white. And that's where you're going, right? Which is, and we're using these terms that are kind of weaponized, which is micromanagement. Me checking in is not micromanaging. So we've got to kind of set new rules, I think. So for example, if you hire somebody and they've got to reach these KPIs, if I reiterate what the KPIs are with clarity, that's not being toxic, that's clarifying. If I'm checking in on results and I need to get updates because of needing to run the business and we all have cash flow, right? That's not micromanaging. So I think there's a definition that has to come, like rules of engagement that might be important to set with teams. It's funny, we talk about this when we talk about simplification of what are the behaviors and norms that we want to set our rules of engagement with each other so we don't take up each other's time incorrectly, right? Like not making decisions, setting up too many meetings. Like we're creating rules of engagement. I think the same thing has to be done with leaders and their teams, which is when I do this, this is the intention. So don't
right?
interpret it a different way. My
I
opinion.
mean, we can't wrap this up, Lisa, without asking you about AI and its impact on leadership. What are you seeing, and then I guess what are your kind of thoughts and vision for what the impact of AI on leadership could be?
I'm addicted. Literally, I use that word because I think that's something we're going to be hearing a lot more about to using AI. I am. I use it for everything. And I think I mean, if you're not using it, I think that's just such a career limiting move. Like, what? How are you not doing it? I mean, one, it's for productivity, but it's interesting. It helps me. I'm a writer and, a strategist. And I think it can help you do two things. One, it can frame my thinking quickly. So that really helps me jumpstart a lot of things. It can't replace my writing yet because it's not yet. I always use the word yet, right? Because it lacks context, it lacks nuance, it lacks human, just new, I guess nuance is the way to say it. What it can help me do is, for example, I just launched an AI coaching model with a company. And if it gets my voice right and I build in empathy, it can really help me coach through people to be better humans. And this sounds odd. But let's say I'm pitching or I have to give somebody feedback. And Bill is very sensitive, but Jane is not. How I would give each of them feedback is very different, and it will coach me,
Right?
right, in terms of how to give better feedback when I'm time strapped as a leader and I'm stressed as a leader. So I think it's going to be a better coach. And it's going to help me it's going to help me think through those scenarios faster and better than doing it on my own.
Yeah, I find one of the kind of jobs of a leader that I feel like doesn't get talked about as much is almost you define the taste for that organization, like the kind of you set the bar for
Mm.
what good looks like, and whether you're like I see it as a product leader, you're setting the taste for what good looks like here, and I feel like even more than before now using AI tools across the business quite actively you almost need to index on that particular trait as a leader more than before. Because what you've got
Interesting.
is now execution machines that can execute. Like if you tell it, this is what good looks like, you got to do A, B, and C and take this into account, it can execute. But whether it executes a good output or a poor output really defines on what your kind of sense of taste and judgment and aesthetic around that.
So from an L&D perspective, here's one thing I would say. Like it's an excellent, I think it could be a great coach because it can activate learning. You know what I mean? Like it can not just say give an output, but can say do this exercise. How would you do it? How would it simulate? So it can help me like prepare for conversations, for example, right? Obviously. But one of the things I think is really great in the age of AI is that human skills have never been more important. And so, for example, AI can give me lots of different output, but am I good at asking it the right questions? It's all about the prompts, really. I mean, it's all about the prompts. So I better have a team that is really good at curiosity, at prompting, at critical thinking, so I can actually test what AI is telling me, not just take it at face value. So those types of human skills are going to be even more important for us to build as L&D professionals for the future, because I don't want AI to replace me because there are certain things that it shouldn't. But I want it to be able to help me think more critically about things for the future, and it will. We've got to prepare, we've got to shift the skills that we teach our teams to marry AI, and I think those are human skills.
Definitely makes sense to me because I think my hypothesis there would be if you're a good manager of people, I think you would be a good manager of AI agents who are going to do the work. Because long as one of the facets
That's a
being
great way to say it.
right, because if you're got that clarity in
Hmm.
setting the expectation and communicating what you want from it and providing the right context for you to go execute that. Now, whether that's a human or an AI agent, you both need the same thing to be able to get to that output. As a human, you might need a little bit more, and then as an agent, you might need a little bit more something else to be able to get to the outcome. So my hypothesis is, I think
Direction.
building that kind of management leadership skill set is going to help you, regardless of whether you do manage people or lead people. And I mean, Lisa, I could keep going. This is fascinating, and I'm pretty certain we're going to get you back on a show again.
Oh, it's
At
been so
some point.
fun. Thank you. Oh my
But
gosh.
before I let you go, what we love to ask our guests is, listeners who've got to this point and are like, oh my God, there's so much actionable stuff to do. What's that one thing, if you were to say to our listeners, say, just one thing, do that today, start now, here's your first step. What's that first step for starting to simplify the complexity around me?
I would ask yourself, what are your biggest time sucks? And what are the time sucks you will stop doing? Stop starting things and stop things instead. So I would actually look at your task list and say, what can I stop doing? We don't do that enough. And I think you should give yourself the permission to do it.
Lisa, you've given me a ton of things to go away to do and to think about. This has been an absolute
Good.
pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need, deliver learning in the flow of work, and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, So Energy, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.